Welcome to the NextGen podcast, where we explore the next generation's perspective on the future of business. This podcast is powered by Commercient Sync. Learn more about integrating your ERP and CRM today at commercient.com.
So, hi everyone, I'm Victoria Jenkins. I'm the content specialist here at Commercient, and I'm also one of the youngest members of Commercient, part of Gen Z. And Noah?
And I'm Noah Thomas. I'm the head of marketing and partnerships here at Commercient, and I'm part of the millennial generation.
And so today we're joined by Alexia Victor. So Alexia mentioned to us that she was born and raised in New York City, and she got her bachelor's in history and communication at Cornell before going to UNC Chapel Hill to get a master's in strategic communication. And since receiving her master's 5 years ago, she's been working in the media industry at Horizon Media, currently working on the Petco account, previously working on Sprint, Boost Mobile, and LG Electronics businesses, and also currently working towards an MBA at the NYU Stern School of Business. So thank you so much for being here today, Alexia. We're really excited. Is there anything I missed on that list? A lot of stuff.
No, thanks for the intro. Since you guys threw in your generations, I'll say I'm a millennial. So joining you, Noah.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to me. So as a NYC native, are you still living in New York City as well?
I am. So New York, born and raised. Only time I was living outside of New York was for undergrad and then grad school. But ever since graduating from UNC, I've been back in New York. And then, so now I'm working here and also getting my MBA here.
Very nice. That's the heartbeat of advertising, right? In New York City, you have to be there.
It is. It's definitely very exciting to be here in this industry.
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump in with one of the very first questions. So what are some of the most notable differences between advertising techniques between the millennial and Gen Z generations, maybe that you've seen?
So I would say for me, it really does go a lot to kind of the ad format and length. Like, I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about comparing the attention span of humans to the attention span of that of a goldfish. My generation, millennials, we have an attention span of 12 seconds. A goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds, and Gen Z has an attention span of 8 seconds. So shorter than that of a goldfish. And kind of that trend, I think it's just going to continue going in that direction, which is why I do feel like as the years go on, you are seeing a lot of shorter ad formats. So, we used to just have the traditional like 15 and 30-second ads, but now you have the 6-second ads, which is kind of catering to more of those social channels. So I think you're just going to see that grow more and more as kind of, I think people just, multitask a little bit more. And then one like new trend, I don't want to say new, but newer trend, which I'm fairly excited about, is kind of the rise of social shopping, which I do feel like goes back to that whole shorter ad format as well, because you do have, as each generation goes on, they have a shorter attention span. So if they're, see an ad that they like, maybe previously they would click on it, go to the website and purchase it. But now with like newer generations, they're not going to leave the website experience. So when you have social shopping ad formats that let you just like see an ad, click on it and buy it without ever leaving the actual platform, I think that's how you're going to push, younger generations down the conversion funnel more. So sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but I'm just really excited about that trend.
No, that's okay. Yeah, no, I definitely noticed like my entire explore page on like Instagram, for example, it's all posts with a product in the first image. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's definitely a big thing for Facebook and Instagram to do that. But how do you think like smaller retailers can compete in that sort of industry? As again, a lot of these products that I am seeing on my Instagram Explore page and in general are from bigger companies that can afford this paid advertising and having the product on the image. Like, are smaller sellers getting lost in that a bit? Perhaps?
So I don't know if I have the data to back this up, but I actually feel like it's the opposite. Like, I feel like a lot of the ads that I'll get served on these platforms are from companies that I've never heard of before. Like, I'm not getting served, for the most part, anytime I see those shoppable ads. They're typically not places that I shop at. Like, I'm exploring new places. So I actually think it's benefiting them. Again, I don't have the data to back that up. That's just like my observation, that I feel like it's benefiting them.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on that. So, do you feel like that's more of a consumerism kind of symptom of our generation? Like, I know especially millennial and Gen Z generations typically prefer less mass-produced things, more sustainable products in general, products that maybe are, you know, in general more like organic or something like that for food purposes. Have that on my mind approaching dinner time. But aside from that, do you think that that's just more of like a something that our generations are looking for in the millennial and Gen Z generation, or do you think that that's part of the Instagram shopping and Facebook shopping experiences that they've kind of set up as an all-in-one?
Well, I feel like each generation that goes on is paying a lot more attention to authenticity. And like
Mm-hmm.
the Gen Z generation, they are probably the least brand loyal generation, because if they were like, I think if you look that up, you'll see Gen Z is the least brand loyal generation. And like, they're definitely a lot more interested in social causes and understanding what stance does a company have, whether that be on sustainability or social issues. So if a company is not taking a clear stance, they're more likely not going to win that Gen Z audience. Which then I think also kind of translate into advertising as well, like why you see influencer marketing work so well, because influencer marketing is really about like the consumers, which yes, of course, there's a paid element there, but the consumers are kind of really advertising the product and like showing, oh, this is how I use it. And you're like, this is an influencer that you're following, you're probably more likely to use it. So I think that like authenticity that younger generations are demanding is really coming forth in those more social advertising channels, whether it be influencer marketing. Social shopping is just very convenient. But then again, I also do think it's important to note that younger generations do really care about what brands believe in. And if brands aren't taking a clear stance, they're not going to win that audience. So it's all about being authentic.
Interesting. Yeah, and I wonder, even going off of the point of influencer marketing, like I mean, I see that endlessly. Like anyone I'm following on Instagram, even the smallest people have like an affiliate link in their bio to smaller brands. I mean, why do you think that works so well with Gen Z? Is it possibly that attention span thing? Like we're just lazy and don't want to do the work to find these good products? Why does that fail with millennials, perhaps, or older generations?
So I think it's probably like a multitude of things. For one, I do think the attention span definitely has something to do with it, because each generation that goes on, you're spending more and more time online. Like Gen Z was born and raised with the internet. Like they're spending more and more time online. You're spending a lot more of your time on these social platforms. So it's kind of just where your attention is. I also think that from an influencer marketing standpoint, I do think it is like important to note that it doesn't always work. Like you can kind of tell when it's not authentic. I can think of certain people that I follow on social channels where it's like, I would never buy anything that they sell to me because they're literally advertising a new product every other day. So I'm like, you clearly don't believe in any of the products that you're advertising. But then I also have, some other people that I follow on social who are maybe only advertising one product every few months, and then it's a consistent partnership. They have a consistent partnership with a handful of brands, and it's very clear that like these are brands they actually use, and it just feels a lot more authentic. So in those instances, I think it's going to resonate with me a lot more if I can like feel that authenticity. But then to your point about maybe why influencer marketing is resonating more with younger generations, I think that's also just because they're happening on these platforms that you're going to find more of the younger generations. Like it's not happening as much on, like social. You're going to find a majority of Gen Z and millennials on social.
Yeah, it's the old classic marketing principle: go where your customers are, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a just kind of a off the cuff question that we have here. So the advertising strategies that you found have responded really well to one group, like let's say Gen Z versus millennials. Have you found any particular advertising strategy that's worked really well to one group but not at all to the other?
I can't really think of any off the top of my head. The only thing I'm just thinking of is like from a trend standpoint, where is it going? Like I do feel like your traditional media formats, like your linear TV, for example, is going to probably work a lot more if you're trying to reach an older audience. And just like as the industry, we know the industry is trending away from linear TV. It is going more towards, those online environments, and those online environments is where you're likely going to be finding those younger audiences. Not to say you're not going to find older audiences on there. Like, of course, they're there as well, but just from like a statistical standpoint, if you're trying to reach Gen Z, you really do have to go to these online platforms. So I wouldn't say there's any particular advertising technique that I can think of that worked really well with one generation and not the other, but just in general, like, know your audience. If I'm, advertising a product and I'm trying to go after like baby boomers, I'm probably not going to be doing like a social media influencer campaign. So, it goes back to making sure you also really understand your audience, because that's also something that I feel like a lot of small businesses in particular, what can bite them is them not truly understanding who their audience is and trying to just go after everyone. If you try to go after everyone, you're going to reach no one. So you just need to make sure that you like fully understand who your target audience is, and then find out where you can find them and go to those particular channels.
Yeah, absolutely. Building buyer personas is so critical before you spend advertising dollars, definitely.
Exactly.
For those that aren't familiar with linear TV, do you want to talk about what linear TV is for our non-advertising gurus?
Yes, sorry. Linear
No, no, you're
TV
good.
is your typical like cable that you're going to see on TV, not, plugged in with like an Apple TV or something. It's typical old school. Although I will say I actually watch linear TV more than I do watch like OTT, which, interesting. I think that probably goes against my generation. But yeah, so linear TV would be your traditional, on your cable box, versus when you get more to OTT formats, that's when you're more online streaming and, plugging something into your TV.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's your over/under on linear TV being gone forever?
I mean, I don't think it's going to be gone forever. I do think the industry is definitely trending. Like, for example, when you think of upfronts, for anyone who hasn't worked in TV, there are pretty much two different ways you can buy TV. You can either buy it through the upfront, where you're basically buying it a full year in advance, or you could buy it through the scatter market, where you're pretty much like buying it when you want to be in the market a few months in advance. And as you look at the upfront market, I'd say previously it used to be that maybe 80% of your buy would be from a linear traditional TV standpoint, and then you'd have like 20% of it in your online video formats. I do think the industry is definitely trending more towards like a 50-50. I think you'll probably see a lot more people, especially coming out of after the pandemic. I think you'll probably see just a lot more people who are going to be switching their buys to favor those online environments and not prioritize linear as much, though I don't think linear will ever die.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Cable news, sports, a lot of live sporting events, even like Macy's Day Parade numbers. I was still kind of surprised, how high those were. I mean, not during the pandemic, but
Yeah.
in a normal year, that is, still pretty viewed, pretty watched.
Yeah. I mean, though I will say I do believe award shows this year all disappointed a little bit. The award
Mm.
show ratings, if I'm not, don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure award shows across the board, people did not tune in linearly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember reading something about the Globes being really low this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right, that's very interesting. And Victoria had a wonderful question here, written down, that said, and that how do you think advertising will change in the next 4 to 5 years in the aftermath of the pandemic? So what do you think in the next 4 to 5 years really got impacted by COVID and really pushed that button a little harder, maybe?
So for one, I would say COVID accelerated digital transformation forward like a decade. The amount of transformations we've had across the board, whether that be in advertising or outside of advertising, we haven't seen this growth in a very, very long time. And that's because when you're in a situation like this, you kind of have to take risks to survive. When, what we're previously doing isn't working, you kind of just have to take risks. Where previously, I think a lot of industries were kind of, worried, oh, if I want to try something new, oh, that's going to cost money and I don't know if it's going to pay off. So we're probably hesitant to trying anything new. During COVID, you had to try something new because you couldn't do what we traditionally done. So for example, you see a lot of, like, for example, classes moved online. I'm taking classes virtually right now. Like that wasn't happening before. Or businesses moving online to a work from home environment, like a lot more online ordering options and just like building out digital infrastructure and like virtual spaces. And then from an advertising standpoint, I think it catered to that a little bit more. And again, just knowing like people are spending a lot more time online. Like I think at the beginning, audio was doing really well, streaming audio, but then maybe not like your terrestrial audio because people weren't driving to work, listening to it in the car, but people are at home listening to like Spotify. So I think that's something that will see the effects of that digital transformation. And I do think now moving forward, you are going to see people a lot less hesitant to take risks now, which I think will be a good thing. You're going to see people do a lot more testing. But I also think you can't look at the pandemic in a silo because of just everything else that's going on with the industry in terms of like the iOS updates, which, you know, kind of goes back to everything that happened with like GDPR and like CCPA. I feel like I'm not sure if I'm getting that second acronym right, but all of that, I think, is probably going to have an even larger impact in the industry. So you're going to have to think about how that is impacting the industry at the same time post-pandemic is happening. So it's going to be a lot more difficult for people, you know, to get personally identifiable information. You're going to have to incentivize consumers to give that to you so that you can still personalize an ad experience, which is, I do think, what the younger generations want. Younger generations want their ad experience to be personalized to them. They want to feel like, you know, this company knows me. They're speaking directly to me. They want that personalization. Now it's going to be a lot harder to do that. So I think moving forward, you're just going to see a lot more companies trying to find creative ways to incentivize you to give you that information. And then you're also going to see that have an impact on like creative formats. I think you're going to see, you know, a lot more native advertising. You're going to have to focus on like contextual alignments as since you're not really going to know, again, that personally identifiable information about your audience. So all of that's going to happen at the same time, which is why I think you can't really look at the pandemic in a silo, since that I think is probably going to have an even bigger effect.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, so I have two kind of things off of that. The first, going back to maybe perhaps the slow sort of reopening with the pandemic and advertising starting again. So we've all seen, as you said earlier, everyone transitioning to more of an online-based advertising. No one's really going out and seeing these physical ads. So at the moment, I'm living in London. I'm not commuting at all, but I take the tube occasionally to go visit friends or go out for dinner as we are slowly reopening and can go to pubs again. But I've noticed in the past month, so I live next to like one of the biggest tube stations in London. I walk down one tunnel and it's a whole tunnel of where Zoho 1 has just completely bought out every single billboard in like, you know, this 100-meter tunnel, not 100-meter, long tunnel. And then the next tunnel is just tons of new, like the iPhone 12 mini ads, like the whole thing is just Apple. It's really painful. But a month ago or a month and a half ago, all of these ads were completely blank and no one was buying these billboards. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing these big companies suddenly jumping on the gun and going, oh, well, you know what? People are back to normal. We can start investing in this again, in these in-person sort of physical ads. Is there any sort of time when people should be doing that as well, even for smaller businesses? Like, is now the time to get back into physical advertising, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a great question. Yes, I do think they should get back to physical advertising, particularly in your larger hubs like a London or, you know, New York. Everyone's outside already in New York already. I mean, our vaccination rates are really great, which is awesome, but like everyone's already back outside in New York and it seems like a little more crowded again. So I am seeing, you know, people take advantage of, you know, digital out of home options, but then I'm also seeing a lot of like really outdated, like taxi advertisements, you know, the advertisement sitting right on top of the taxi. They're advertising for like a season premiere of a show from over a year ago. And I'm like, yeah, maybe someone should take up that ad space now because people are getting out more. But I don't think that means to say that it's going to go back to our old media mix. I think it's probably going to be a little bit of the old and a lot of the new. You're going to see people who maybe were hesitant to try advertising on social, who are maybe hesitant to try partnering with influencers or anything like that, and who have tested it out over the last few months. They've definitely seen the success of that. So I think they're going to keep that in their mix while also bringing back a little bit of some of the old. And I'm sure that some of those outside advertising formats, those are probably also going to be a lot cheaper to purchase now. So you're able to kind of maybe rebalance your budgets a little bit from a media standpoint to ensure that you're still hitting on some of your old places, but then also keeping what you're doing with the new. Like we always say, this is something from both like my industry and also from school, we always talk about is focusing more on like a 70-20-10 mix. So you typically want to focus on 70% of doing what you know is tried and true, doing what you know works within like, you know, your media buy. Then you want to have 20% of it where you're kind of expanding on what's worked, like evolving it a little bit more. And then 10% where you're focusing on innovation and you're trying something new. I think probably moving forward, especially after coming out of the wave we were just in, where definitely you weren't really relying on your tried and true anymore, and you had to focus more on that evolution and innovation bucket, you'll probably see that mix of that 70-20-10. I think maybe you'll probably see that shift to maybe like a 50-30-20 or something along those lines. I do think you're going to see people leave a lot more room to experiment with new ad formats and evolve on some of these new ad formats they were working with, because they did see that kind of pay off during this time. And if you didn't experiment during this time, I don't know if your business is still around. You kind of had to in order to make sure that you were staying alive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love the formula. Very appealing in that sense, yeah. So then, I mean, even just in the changes that may happen in the next 4 to 5 years, is there anything that you're really excited about, perhaps?
Interesting question. Again, I'm curious to see where social shopping goes, since I do think that is, again, on the newer front. So I'm curious to see how they evolve that a little bit more. I do think as well, there's going to probably be a lot more evolution within the streaming space. So streaming and social shopping, like those are the two key things I'm kind of focusing on. I'm curious to see how they'll evolve. But again, they've grown so much now that it's great that now you can have people who see a product and they can purchase the product like right there within the ad without ever having to leave the platform. That's something that maybe like 5 years ago, or I wouldn't have really thought that would be something that would be feasible. So where they can kind of go with that even more, where, I mean, I know they kind of do it with Alexa, where you can do from an audio, like add this to my Amazon cart, but maybe that will expand even more within maybe like your Spotify's of the world. Maybe you'll find a way where they're somehow incorporating like an audio buying feature, which I don't know if that's anything that's, if anyone's looking into that or anything at all. And again, I know like Alexa does that more with like an Amazon, but I'm curious to see if that will expand to multiple different places, like you're seeing with the social shopping, where anyone can really buy that ad and someone can purchase the ad right there in the experience. So I'm curious to see where that goes.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh yeah. So on that, I was curious. You mentioned loyalty programs. We have a lot of, especially with the new Google updates and the new iOS updates with diminished cookies. So you had mentioned those before. For our listeners that aren't maybe as familiar with either one of these things, iOS rolled out a new app or new set of rules, let's just call it that, that basically allows users to choose whether or not apps track their data or whether or not apps can receive their data. And you can choose that as soon as you open the app now. Allow this app to track my data, or however it's phrased. I think I've bumbled that a little bit, but the Google and the Google update that basically Google is going to feed you less data from people's Google accounts. So with both of those things, and playing into loyalty and kind of trying to incorporate loyalty programs, how much of that do you think that companies can look at and say, okay, well, now that I'm not getting as much buyer data, how much more is this person's information worth to me? In that respect, do you think people will change their loyalty programs to become more beneficial to the end users?
Definitely. Like right now, it's going to be finding ways to incentivize consumers to give you that data, whether it's incentivizing them, like I'll send you our latest deals as soon as they're available, or sending them with, sign up for a mailing list and we'll get you, we'll send you a coupon code or every week or something like that. Incentivizing them in some way to hand over that information, that's really going to be key, because they're not going to be able to rely on these, external data sources as much anymore. It's really going to be focusing on growing their first party data. And the way that they're going to have to do that is they're going to have to provide some incentives to those consumers to actually like hand over that data.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think there's any other way around it, right? I mean,
exactly. Like the only thing that I'm thinking of, which I don't think it's a way around it, but if you're not somehow capturing that information, the only thing I'm thinking of is, again, I think there'll probably be like a rise in contextual advertising. So, for example, if you're trying to sell a dog product, you're just going to really have to focus on running your ads really next to content that's, explicitly focused on dogs. But, right now you're able to figure out like, oh, dog owners, these are like other non-dog content that they like. And you're able to figure that out from like your other data sources. You're not gonna be able to rely on that as much anymore. So I think you're just going to really have to focus more on contextual advertising, making sure that your ads are really, again, near to the content where you think you'll likely be able to find this target audience. And then you also may see a rise in native advertising, which I think this goes back kind of a little bit more to what I was talking about, the attention span. A really good example, we were just talking in one of my classes recently, we were talking about Spotify and how, if you think about it, again, going back to that short attention span thing, if you have a consumer who's listening to music and then they have an ad that breaks them up that is not a music ad, it's, someone just talking at you, that's going to be a little bit jolting and kind of break you out from the experience. Versus if you're listening to music and then you get an ad that has music layered into it and it feels a little bit more natural, maybe, I don't want to say you won't notice, but maybe it won't be as jolting and you're going to be more likely to stay in that experience. So I think that is also something that's going to be in the rise a little bit. That doesn't really go back to in terms of collecting first party data, but just something in general. I think probably at the same time that we're seeing contextual advertising is going to get more important. I think you're going to see native advertising get more important at the same time that you're seeing companies are going to have to find ways to incentivize people to hand over their personally identifiable information.
Yeah, and then total left field. I recently saw in some automotive news that Ford has decided to make an app. I don't know if you've seen this or not, that when you drive past a billboard, it gives you a 10-second non-skippable ad on your display screen. They patented the technology recently. I don't know that they've used it, but what's your take on that?
Interesting. That's really interesting. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. I'm thinking that it would probably be in conjunction with, companies like Placed. I always forget if it's Placed or Placed IQ, but places where they can kind of geo-target and see where you are in relation to a billboard ad. I could see them doing something in those lines, kind of a partnership there. But that's really interesting.
Yeah,
that could distract drivers if it's a display ad versus if it's an audio ad. Like
right.
if they're listening to the radio or something and then they pass a billboard and they get an audio ad related to the billboard they just saw. I think that would be awesome. If it's a display ad though on there, that could be a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. That was kind of the debate I was reading on it, and it's funny. That's immediately where my mind jumped. It was like, oh, if I passed a billboard for Salesforce, and then all of a sudden a Salesforce ad was the next thing that triggered in between songs or on the podcast in the ad block, that would be an interesting experience because then I would at least have some distant association, right, from passing the billboard. So
and that kind of that reminds me of kind of like retargeting almost.
Right.
When someone goes to a website or someone was searching for something, then you get retargeted for the ad. You get retargeted for the company later. That's kind of similar. You just pass the billboard. Now you're about to get kind of like retargeted in a way, but in a different format. Though again, I think audio format, that sounds great. Display format while you're driving, I think
super
that's
dangerous.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, it was just an interesting thing that I came across, and I thought, oh, advertising professional, better ask that question. And then so the next thing that I had to ask is from a B2B standpoint. So I know you work with a lot of B2C brands, and you have worked with a lot of B2C brands, and to counterbalance that, they obviously do have a B2B side of their business. I'm sure that maybe you've worked on or not, but from a B2B side, how do you think that some of these advertising strategies will start to trickle down? I often see B2C brands be the forefront innovators, and then B2B brands pick up these strategies much later. Is that something that you think will continue?
Very interesting. To your point, I definitely don't work on B2B as much. But for those, I'm thinking more so in regards to, I think it's probably really going to hurt those B2B brands, some of those social shopping formats, because they want you, when you see an ad, they want you to then click to their website and now start adding some of their other products to cart. And when you're doing an ad, like say I see an ad for, I just have chapstick here, Aquaphor. If I see an ad for Aquaphor and I'm able to just purchase it right there in the ad, I can see, from a B2, retailers not liking that as much, because otherwise if I were to click in it and go to Walmart or something, I'm going to maybe be more inclined to, I want to get that free shipping. So let me add some of these other products. So I could actually see them not liking it as much because they're not going to get, that residual effect of other people adding to cart.
Yeah, interesting. And then, so a lot of companies that we've spoken to during the pandemic, and our business ends up crossing a lot of sections over with different industries and things of that nature. So we've gotten the chance to talk to a lot of different executives during this time, have told us that there have been new buyer personas that have emerged. Whether it's they didn't realize that maybe there was a Gen Z or a millennial working at their workplace that was an influencer in a sale, or if it was maybe just something completely out of left field. Like, for instance, I know the Elmer's glue and what was it, the slime. I don't know if that's like a commonly well-known thing, but like Elmer's glue just all of a sudden realized, oh, people are buying glue not to glue things together, but to make this like kind of like slime Play-Doh stuff that people were really into
Some
for a
like
while.
Nickelodeon slime.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, how much of that do you think applies to advertising with new buyer personas? What would you recommend to approach for, let's say, a new business that recently discovered a buyer persona during the pandemic?
Definitely an interesting question. I do think personas are something you should always be evaluating. And it's
Hmm.
something I think, like, at the very minimum, once a year, you should be checking to see, like, is my target audience still the same target audience? And if it's not, like, you need to do a lot of work to understand, like, kind of where are you missing? Is your target audience too broad, or are you trying to go after, maybe you're trying to go after a premium audience and it just turns out this is not a product for a premium audience. This is more of a product for more of an everyday audience. So I think you need to just always be keeping a pulse on that. And then again, like, buyer behaviors change, but as you can see during the pandemic, buyer behaviors change a lot, and
Yeah.
the people you're advertising to, they changed. So I think that's definitely interesting. I think, it's fine as well, if you have like a secondary target and a primary target.
Hmm.
I think, that's probably a good idea to have. But as I was talking about before, making sure that you're not trying to advertise to everyone, because if you're trying to reach everyone, you're going to reach no one, because it's
Yeah.
not going to feel very personalized. It's not going to feel like, oh, this is for them. So making sure that you just like truly understand your target audience. And to that point, reevaluate your target at least once a year, at the very minimum, maybe multiple times a year, maybe even twice a year, just to ensure, again, that your advertising methods and everything you're going after, you really are trying to speak to the correct audience.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I even had a question written down kind of similar to that one about, is it better if a company or business finds that it's trying to market to multiple buyer personas in multiple age groups at once, is it better to advertise to each persona individually, or just run one large campaign that covers all of them better? But yeah, I mean, as you answered, each persona individually works best. And I mean, do you see often perhaps that on different social media platforms you have to run a different campaign altogether just because the personas are so different, perhaps?
I can definitely see you running different creative. You could have different creative for one target audience versus another. That's why, it is typically best practice to ensure that you have more than one creative in market, so you can kind of optimize accordingly and ensure that you're reaching your correct audience. In terms of having a different buy altogether, yeah, like I've been on brands before where they've done that. Like, we have our main target that we're trying to reach, but then we'll run a separate campaign trying to reach that secondary target. And usually that's because also the secondary target is just like very different. So for example, maybe your primary target, you're going after adults 25 to 54, but then you want to have a specific campaign where you're going after veterans. That veteran group may not be captured like explicitly within your adults 25 to 54 target. So making sure that you are kind of looking, okay, where can I reach veterans in particular? Of course, making sure you have your age and, your other demo qualifiers in mind. And then you can put together a separate buy for that. I think that's totally fine. You don't want to, have 5 different things like that, because then you're going to confuse the market,
Yeah.
because you can have someone see multiple of those different ads and be like, well, wait a second, I thought that this was like a product specifically for like for a millennial or something, but now I'm seeing this advertised to like something entirely different. Maybe, like, what's going on here? Are they being a little bit inauthentic? So just making sure you're not overdoing it. If you have 2 different campaigns to reach 2 different target audiences, which I think does happen a lot, that's totally fine. Again, just making sure that you understand who your target audience is, and that you've correctly done the research to identify, like, that primary and that secondary audience.
Okay, great. No, were you about to say something?
Yeah, so I had one last question for you, which had more to do with, let's call it a newer social media. I don't know how new exactly it is, but looking at Clubhouse and looking at young professionals that typically listen to our podcast and trying to address that audience and that interest. Um, I've noticed a trend in especially younger people in the millennial generation building a career off of content. Being in the marketing space, similar to you, we worry about these things. We write articles on Medium, we write articles on LinkedIn. How much of building an audience and building a personal brand do you feel like will influence the next CMO, executive seat, wherever that you might go in your career?
That is definitely a really interesting question. I would say Clubhouse is something, I keep hearing about it, the rise of Clubhouse. It's where everyone is. I have not checked out Clubhouse at all yet. I'll be honest with you. But to your point, I think, something really interesting. One of my friends is a professor, and she had told me, she had given her class an assignment on, what do you want to be when you graduate? And I think it was like 30% of her class wrote they want to be a social media influencer. And like that is just shocking to me when you hear about that like I don't think even 5 years ago you'd hear that would be like what someone would say, like, this is my dream job. But now a lot of these different social platforms, they've made it possible where people can build up their brand. And it is something that I do think they talk about a lot. Like it's been talked about when I went to get my master's. It's been talked about not as much in my MBA program. But that you do need to ensure you do have an authentic personal brand. That is something you should always be cognizant of. Like you should always be aware of what is your brand, or how would people kind of define your brand. Whether that means you need to have like a big social presence, that's not to say, no, you don't have to do that. Like I definitely don't do that. But you should be cognizant of how people would identify your brand. So all that to say, I do think it is something that's important. And it is interesting to me, again, to see that this is something that a lot of people will identify as like, this is their dream job when they graduate from college. They want to be an influencer. And a lot of these different platforms and like the growth of content have made that more possible. I have not had the time to even look into this. I eventually will, but I have not had the time to look into it yet.
One day.
Yeah. I am on Clubhouse. I have done my due diligence Clubhouse research. It's very, in my experience now, of course, I live in a small bubble of startup world here in Atlanta, and that's the kind of the world that I've stepped into and been for my undergrad degree, and those are the people that I know. So a lot of Clubhouse for me has been a lot of startup talk and getting in rooms and talking about different things. But I think it's a really interesting social media that has potential, as you said, rightfully so, I think, Alexia, is that Instagram and Facebook maybe isn't the place for B2B brands. And I think we've already kind of seen that it's not the place for B2B brands to really sell their things. But things like LinkedIn products and Clubhouse, I kind of wonder if that's maybe where that market moves and shifts and goes, okay, well, Instagram, Facebook, maybe not our optimal targeting, but do we target over on LinkedIn or on Clubhouse? Because you see these CMOs and these executives get on these calls, and there's thousands, tens of thousands sometimes in these rooms listening to whatever they say for sometimes hours. It's really, really kind of interesting.
I know. I mean, I keep hearing people talk all about Clubhouse, but I mean, I do think it is interesting. Again, just you do have so many more options for social media now, to the point where it's, probably becoming a little bit difficult to keep up. Like, I mean, I have maybe 3 social media platforms. Like, I definitely do not have all the social media platforms, but I have the ones that, I stick to. I've tried out some of them before, but something that is really important as well is for a brand to understand which of those platforms they should be on. Like if you're looking for more of like a community building setting, you're going to want to be going more for a Facebook. If you're particularly trying to capture like Gen Z and you're trying to be like a fun brand, you're probably going to try to want to be on TikTok. Instagram may be something that's a little bit more in the middle. Kind of understanding where your target audience is, I think, will also then drive which platforms you're going to be on. because I don't think you're going to be on all of them, because that's going to be maybe a little bit disjointed. Like, I don't think you're going to see a brand that is literally has a strong social media strategy across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, Tumblr, or Reddit. Like, I don't think you're going to see a brand that has a strong social media platform across all of those. You're going to see them prioritize maybe 2 or 3 that are where they know that their target audience is, and those are going to be the platforms that they're really focused on. Yeah. It would kind of concern me, I think, actually, if a brand was trying to get all of the social media platforms. Well, that would concern me a little bit.
They came and had advertising spend, and they were like, "Hey, we have $100,000, but we want to slice it up into like 60 TV ads." You would probably go like, "Whoa."
Yeah. I'd be like, one, why do you want to be on all these channels? Like, right. Who is your target audience? If you're trying to have a strategy that wins at all of those channels, my very first question is to be like, who are you trying to target? Because I don't think you know if you're trying to win at every single one of those channels. Not to say that doesn't mean you can't be on all of them, but if you're like trying to win at all of those, I think that probably to me would say you don't truly know who your target audience is, and maybe you don't even really know your brand. You're trying to figure it out. So that's something that would probably make me do a double take if I saw that.
Only oddity I've seen across these platforms in relation to that is perhaps things like NPR, CNN, other channels similar to those. I have seen those advertising on multiple platforms in multiple ways and actually succeeding across all of them. Like NPR, for example, has like this great sort of Planet Money TikTok. They have their Instagram page, their typical podcasting stuff, and Facebook, etc. But yeah, I think it's interesting how those sort of news podcast sources are actually successful across a lot of platforms at the same time.
I mean, a really great example that I was just looking up was Washington Post. Washington Post is, I think, probably the last brand I would think of that's winning at TikTok. And when I was like trying to see like, oh, what brands are winning at TikTok? Every article that I was looking at was saying that, wow, Washington Post is winning at TikTok. So I like started looking into it. And it's because they were doing some like funny videos of, their employees working from home, and they were doing like some informative educational sketches, and they were making it educational. So kind of going back to, the news format, which that to me, I think is really interesting. Like they did try it and they did win. But I mean, I'm sure they probably also, I imagine they do great on Twitter, probably Facebook and Instagram as well, maybe Instagram. But I don't know if you're going to see they also have that a really strong strategy on Snapchat and Pinterest and Clubhouse, like 3, which usually when we do media buys, we do like between 1 and 3 platforms. Probably best to do at least 2, I'd say, but we do like 1 to 3 platforms. But if you're doing all of them, if you're also then trying to have a very strong on Twitter and LinkedIn and like all of those, I can't think of one brand that does have a really strong, strategy across all those channels.
Yeah.
And now maybe I'm going to look. Now I'm going to look to see what is one brand that's winning across everything.
Everything. Yeah.
That would be interesting. That would definitely be interesting. If you find it before we release a podcast, we'll put the link down in the description. But I've always heard that the old phrase master of none, right? You can't be a master of everything. If you try it too many things, you just end up having too many irons in the fire.
Exactly, which goes back to, again, talking about like you can't try to target everyone, just like you can't try to win on every single channel. You could try to win on like 2 or 3 channels, no problem. But you also can't try to win every single target audience, because who is your product for? Is your product for like a 20-year-old college student? Is your product for like a working professional? Like, who is your product for? You can't advertise to literally every single audience and think that you can win every single audience. It's gonna come across as not personalized, which again, with where the industry is going, you're gonna have to try to find ways now to be personalized, because it's gonna be even harder. So with that, I think brands are gonna have to do an even more work to try to figure out exactly who their target audience is, because they're going to really have to spend a lot more effort on personalization now, because it's going to be a lot harder.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. Well, Alexia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
So all of Alexia's social medias that she's provided can be found in the show notes below. There's definitely a LinkedIn page that I saw in the list. Anything else you want to plug quick?
Main one I'm gonna just plug is LinkedIn. I don't think I'll plug my my Instagram or any of those. I think I'll just go for the LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, yeah. LinkedIn, safe choice. Yeah, connect with her in there, send her a message. Okay, and of course, if you're in the search for an ERP and CRM solution, integration solution, I should say, don't forget to check out our page for Commercient Sync. All of our social medias and more information can be found below. And let your salesperson know that you have the promo code podcast10.
Thanks for listening to the NextGen podcast, and don't forget to subscribe to the NextGen podcast on your favorite listening platform so that you never miss an episode. You can find more at the NextGen podcast content on all of Commercient's social media channels, and those are all at Commercient. Thanks, everyone. And Alexia, thank you again for joining us on the NextGen podcast.
Thank you. This was fun.